What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Reformed Reader, the channel where we review different forms of media through the lens of a Christian who is under the authority of the scriptures. My name is Josh, and today we are going to be doing a book review of a series, and that series is the Dresden Files. I'm going to be doing sort of an overview of the Dresden Files as a series. Now, I thought about breaking this up into individual books, but there's 17 of them at the time of recording this, and I didn't really feel like going into each and every one. So we're going to look at them as a whole. But before we get into the review, let's go over what is this series about. As a professional wizard, Harry Dresden knows firsthand that the everyday world is actually full of strange and magical things, and most of them don't play well with humans. And those that do, enjoy playing with humans far too much. He also knows he's the best at what he does. Technically, he's the only at what he does. But even though Harry is the only game in town, business, to put it mildly, stinks. So when the Chicago PD bring him in to consult on a double homicide committed with black magic, Harry's seeing dollar signs. But where there's black magic, there's a black mage behind it. And now that mage knows Harry's name. So guys, if you're new to the channel, the way that I normally structure my reviews is I go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good being the things about the book that I enjoyed, the bad being the things that didn't work so well for me, and these are preferential things like maybe prose or a character I didn't like. But then I go into the ugly, which is what could be some sin that is steeped into this work that might hold a Christian back from picking it up. And I break that down into 5 categories and rate them out of 10. But before we jump into that, just as sort of an overview of what the Dresden Files is, the overarching story of the Dresden Files is we're following Harry Dresden, who is a wizard for hire. So sort of imagine X-Files, but if our investigators, our private investigators, knew magic and could use magic to solve cases or to help people who are dealing with supernatural things. That's what this story is about. It's about a wizard for hire that predominantly deals in private investigations. So the entire series, for the most part, is based out of Chicago. And so we're following Harry's story, not only in an episodic nature with each installment, but you do have an overarching story or that underlying story that is carrying the plot all the way through. And obviously, as you continue on throughout the series, that plot tends to thicken quite a bit. So if you like sort of the private investigator type story, but maybe add a little bit of a magical twist with quite a bit of humor, this is what the Dresden Files is. It's all of that blended together. So for me, it is one of my favorite series. But even though it's one of my favorite series, I'm not going to be pulling any punches today. But before we get there, let's start with the good. What are some things about this series that I enjoy? The characters. Harry Dresden, first and foremost, is one of my favorite characters of all time. He's absolutely hilarious. I find that he tends to see hope in hopeless situations. I love his sort of inner monologuing. I love that he's quippy. I love that he doesn't take himself too seriously. I see a lot of myself as far as those things go. I see a lot of myself in the protagonist, which is probably why I like our protagonist so much, because some people do take issue with him, and rightfully so, and we'll get into that in a minute. But for the most part, Harry is he's a good guy that is just trying to make a difference and is trying to keep the world from ending, or he is trying to save those that he loves. And over the extent of all of these books, he's having to deal with a lot of these moral questions, such as, do the ends justify the means? And if so, to what extent? And so you tend to get quite a bit of depth with each book, even though many others may think that this is sort of a schlocky throwaway series. For me personally, I absolutely love the characters, and to see Harry's arc, to see how he has drastically changed. And on top of that he makes bad decisions. And I don't mean that like, ooh, I love that he makes bad decisions. What I mean is he seems very human. He makes decisions that don't always make sense, but that's because we are obviously dealing with retrospect. But I do like that he is making real decisions, and those real decisions always have consequences, positive and negative. So yeah, the characters are great. The setting is fine to me. I do like the setting. I do like that we're centralized in Chicago, but I also enjoy when we get to reach outside of Chicago. It changes things up a little bit. When you're reading Harry Potter, yes, Hogwarts is great, but you don't only want to spend your entire time in one classroom. And that's sort of how I'm looking at the Dresden Files, is we are centralized in Chicago, but we're not bound to Chicago. The plot is fantastic, but the pacing is just exceptional. One of the things that I enjoy the most about this series is how readable it is. It is so easily readable. This series is extremely accessible to somebody that is trying to get into fantasy, especially urban fantasy. And I don't think somebody could mention urban fantasy nowadays without mentioning the Dresden Files in the next breath, because they do sort of go hand in hand here. So the characters, the plot, the pacing, and I would say, as far as like the individual books go, yes, there are some books that are weaker than others, but overall, I have not read a book that I didn't enjoy. I think the lowest rating I gave a book was like a 7, and there's reasons for that we'll get into in a minute. But otherwise, this series probably sits at about like an 8.5 or a 9 overall over 17 books, and so that's saying quite a bit for me. So now let's go over the bad. What are some things about this series that I don't enjoy? Well, sometimes Harry takes things a little too far. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here just to save spoilers, but yeah, Harry is a serial bachelor, and many of his decisions and the ways that he thinks reflects that. And some people criticize Jim Butcher for writing the series and writing some of these things, especially when Harry's having that sort of inner monologue. They're like, that's disgusting that he would think that about this person or that person, or I can't believe he would just sort of dehumanize this other person over here. And while maybe their criticism is valid to a degree, it also really makes sense for the character. It's not like Jim Butcher is writing a story about himself and then you're like, wow, he's a horrible person. No, this is a fictional character. He's pretend. I know that sometimes that ruffles some feathers, but yeah, this is all make believe. But at the same time, Jim Butcher is trying to get us to relate to somebody that is fictional. And so there are things that he does and things that he writes, as far as like some of the decisions that Harry makes, some of the comments that Harry makes, some of the things that Harry thinks, and that we obviously hear his internal monologue. Many people are like, he's repulsive, or some people say that he's misogynistic and that he's sexist. But I do just want to maybe not push back, but just maybe qualify that I am very glad that people don't know what I'm thinking all of the time. I'm very glad that my inner monologue is not external, because I would be ashamed. And I think Jim Butcher just sort of shines a light on that. He's just shining a light on what maybe some normal-ish type of character who is born and raised in Chicago, how he might think, feel, act, and speak. And so I would say it's realistic, and probably as realistic as it could be, while still being told in this fictional world. So what are some other things about the series that I didn't much care for? I definitely think that there were times when Jim Butcher lingered too long in certain stories, or he lingered too long in certain settings, maybe for that shock factor or whatever. But preferentially speaking, I think there are certain arcs within the book series where you can kind of see this is how Harry was. This is what Harry's having to deal with currently. And then you can start to see his trajectory moving forward. I don't think that all of the individual books worked just phenomenally for me, but there are some that worked a lot better than others. And so sometimes I think that maybe he could have tightened things up just a little bit. And this is a controversial opinion, I think, within the Dresden Files, but I actually was not a fan of the book changes, and I actually enjoyed the early books. I know those are the two main criticisms with this series, apart from a big one, which we'll get into. But they say, once you get to the book changes, it's fantastic, and that book will just blow your mind. And I was kind of like, it was okay. It was fine with me. And the big change that happened, like, I kind of couldn't care any less about. And if you've read the series, you know what I'm talking about. I was like, it kind of felt unearned as the story was written. But my other controversial opinion is that I actually really enjoyed the first couple of books. And pretty much everybody that tries to pitch this series on YouTube says, well, if you make it through the first couple of books, then the story starts to get good. And I'm kind of sitting here thinking, like, if you didn't like books 1 or 2, you probably won't like the rest of them, because yes, it's a less polished version, but the story is still good. And overall, you're still getting kind of the same themes. And so I would say, yeah, if you don't like books 1 and 2, you probably aren't going to like the rest of the series. But I personally enjoyed books 1, 2, and 3. I know people really hate on the book Full Moon. I love that book. It's one of my favorites in the series. But again, that's just my personal opinion. Otherwise, there isn't a lot in this series that I dislike that is preferential. I think, like I said, I think the writing is really accessible. I think the characters are relatable. I think the pacing is fantastic most of the time. And the fact that Jim Butcher is able to really pump books out the way he is, that is a huge thumbs up from me, a consumer, because, you know, there are some series that will never be finished, the 2 series that shall not be named. But those series will never be finished, and yet Jim Butcher is pumping out normally 1 to 2 books a year. Maybe not always in this series, but he's normally pumping out 1 to 2 books on average a year, and that's impressive. So the guy's really not just honed his craft, but he's still, for me, he hasn't told a story that has missed. And so this leads me into the ugly, which is what could be some sin that is steeped into this series that might hold a Christian back from picking it up. And I break this down into 5 categories, starting with violence and brutality. Now, again, I'm rating the series as a whole, so I'm going to rate it at its peak in all of these categories. So at its peak, what would I give this series as far as violence and brutality goes? I would probably give this series overall a 6.5. There are times when the series can push the limits close to an 8, but overall, I would say the series isn't super brutal. It's violent a bit, but I wouldn't say that it's brutal. It doesn't really go into, the gore or anything like that, but it does explain what's going on. There are big battle scenes, and so maybe a 7, but I don't think I would push it past a 7 in my personal opinion. So I don't think the violence and brutality is going to hold most people back from picking the series up. So this leads me into category 2, which is sexually explicit content. Now, for sexually explicit content, I'm going to give this one an 8. Pretty high. And there are a few scenes in particular that have pushed it up to this level. Now, again, many people criticize the series by saying he's sexist or misogynistic because he's constantly sexualizing the female characters that pop up in all of the different stories. And while, yes, that may be true to an extent, I don't think that it is anything most of the time that is gratuitous, but it can definitely be too much for some. Now, there is one scene in particular that is pretty explicit, and I skipped it. And this is just me being transparent with you guys. As a matter of fact, part of the reason why I have waited so long to do a review on this series is because I don't want people to go, he read the Dresden Files and he says he's a Christian, but a real Christian wouldn't read this series because it has this and this and this and this in it. That's fine. If you don't think that you should read the series, please do not read it. I'm not trying to tell you to read against your convictions or to go against your convictions. If you don't think that you should read the series, please by no means pick it up, or by no means continue. If you feel that your conscience is pricked because of you reading these types of things, these are fantasy books written for adults, as silly as that may sound to some people. They do have adult themes in them. And so you're going to deal with some of that sometimes. And I'm not holding Jim Butcher to the standard that I would hold a Christian to. Because if Jim Butcher came out and said, hey, I'm a Christian, I'm a devout Christian, I believe, teach, preach, and practice what the word tells me, and then he were to include this, I would be more severe. And there's scripture that backs that up. Don't just roast me in the comments, because anyway, but I will say that there are a few sexually explicit scenes, and there's almost always some sort of sexual tension between characters in pretty much all of the books. And in pretty much all of the books, there is mention of some sort of adult behavior. With all that being said, I use that to sort of launch myself into it can be excessive at times. And so thankfully for me, I was just able to skip those things. If you can't skip them, I understand. I completely agree and will support you in that. Thankfully, I've listened to almost all of them on audio. And so that was at like the end of a chapter. And so I just skipped it and went on to the next. And then I was like, well, I'll just pick up context clues moving forward. And I understand that some people can't do that with a book series, but I kind of see it similarly to some of the movies that my wife and I enjoy. There are some scenes that we just skip over and we don't feel convicted to necessarily step away from the work completely just because it has this one, 20-second clip that we can just hit a button and skip past it. That's not going to be for everybody, but for me personally, I just skipped past it and I was perfectly fine with it. But if you get to those points and you're like, whoa, he's kind of crossing a line here. He's being excessive. He's being gratuitous with these things. Then yeah, maybe put it down. So yeah, I'm going to say it's an 8 because I want to give you a fair warning about what to kind of expect when you jump into this series. Cause I don't want you to pick it up because, oh, Josh said this is only a 4. And so this should be fine for me to read. And then you open it up and then, waste your time, money, effort. And then I ruin my credibility with you because I recommended a series that you don't think you should have picked up. So yeah, I'm going to say the sexually explicit content's pretty high. So this leads me to category 3, which is language. And now language includes swearing and blasphemy. And for language, I'm going to give this a 7. Again, this is for the series as a whole. There's quite a bit of adult language used in these books. And when emotions are high, the language is more severe. I would say that it's realistic. I would say that it's what you would expect of the world. I would say it's what you can expect if you were to visit Chicago and were to just listen to some conversations between strangers. It's kind of what you would expect. So this leads me into category 4, which is gratuitous inclusions. And for gratuitous inclusions, I'm going to give this a 5. Yeah, there's not really a whole lot gratuitous in this series. There's a couple mentions of a character that is playing a role that is trying to infiltrate a certain organization. And in order to do that, he convinces people that he's attracted to the same sex. Now, is it a big part of the story? No, it's not really gratuitous. And if you guys know anything about Jim Butcher, Jim is not on board the woke train. As far as the series goes, yeah, you're going to deal with quite a diverse cast, but as far as like gratuitous inclusions, there's a little bit every once in a while, just kind of sprinkled in there. A few same-sex characters are mentioned, but really it's just mentioned and it doesn't go into detail about any of that. Overall, I'd say yeah, it's about a 5. And so this leads me into the final category, which is dark themes. Now for dark themes, I also include heavy themes. And for dark themes, I'm going to give this a 6. So the series as a whole, it does dabble in, like the description read, dark magic. It does deal in, sorcery. It does deal in sometimes spirits. It does mention demons. There are several books where he's fighting demons in like the biblical ones. So as far as dark themes go, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say this is horror, but it probably toes that line in certain books. So even though this is sort of like a lot of people pitch this book as sort of like the creature feature of the week type of story, and while it does have those elements in there, I still wouldn't really say that it's horror. There are horrific things that occur in the books, but I wouldn't say this is one where you're sitting at the edge of your seat and that, sort of gives you that creepy feeling. But there are a few of those dark themes that are strung throughout the entire series as a whole. So yeah, I'm going to put this sort of at a flat 5. So this leads me to the final question, which is, would I recommend it to a Christian? And the answer is, it just depends. It's going to really depend on you personally. If you like the idea of reading a series that's like the X-Files meets supernatural, then you're going to like this. It really kind of has that feel. I heard somebody pitch this once as Harry Potter for adults, which I can definitely see quite a few similarities there. But for me, this has been like the best palate cleanser series that I've read. If I ever sort of needed that one series that I can go back to when I'm dealing with sort of fantasy burnout, it's always been this series up until I've been caught up. Would I recommend the series to a Christian? I would, but it's really going to depend on the individual. I would not recommend this to everybody. I would not recommend this to most people. I would probably have to sit down with you personally and sort of ask some probing questions like, hey, what kind of movies do you like? What kind of TV shows do you like? Do you like this? Do you like these elements in here? And then after sort of getting a consensus of the types of media that you like to consume or be entertained by, then it'll give me a better feel of whether or not I could actually recommend this to you. So I would say if you're on the fence, try book one. If you like book one, then continue. And because I do think that you'll like the books progressively more. If you read book one and it's not for you, the series may not be for you. And I definitely wouldn't want you wasting your time in a 17, soon to be 18 book series, which I think upon completion is going to be like 25 books. Would I recommend it to a Christian? It's really going to depend on the individual. So if you who are watching this video personally want to know whether or not I would recommend it to you, just shoot me an email and I'll let you know if I think that maybe this is a series that could work for you, because for those people that it works for, it really works, and I'm one of them. So overall, I've absolutely loved this series. I don't think it's the perfect series by any means. It definitely has its issues. However, overall, I have absolutely loved this story, and I have loved the character of Harry Dresden, and the writing is just superb. On top of that, if you guys like these books, try the audiobooks. If you guys are audiobook people, I don't think there is a better audiobook narrator than James Marsters. He does such a fantastic job, so much so that when I physically read the Dresden Files, I hear his voice. It is just fantastic. If you guys are interested in this and you're interested in all in audiobooks, this is the series to pick up, in my opinion. But overall, I have absolutely loved this series, and I plan to continue as long as Jim is writing and he's, he doesn't cross the line very frequently for me. I think that this will be a series that I not only continue with, but that I continue to love and to recommend. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me and spending some time with me, ramble about this series. If you guys have any questions, please leave me a comment down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.